Serious. Eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? Many years ago, a friend and I decided to visit our mutual friend at her university and spend the weekend with her. We had extremely detailed directions to follow, and we were told the trip should take about 3 hours. While nothing went wrong on our drive, it seemed to take forever. I don't remember exactly at what point the woods started, but I do remember traveling through these woods for a long time, perhaps an hour. We were already well past the 3-hour time frame my friend had given us by the time we left the woods. When we finally reached my friend's college town, it was nearly 4.5 hours since we'd left. We didn't get lost. We never hit traffic or stopped for more than a few minutes. But we quickly forgot about it since we were happy to spend the weekend with our friend. When the trip back was a little over 3 hours, we thought it was weird but didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until my next trip to visit that I realized something had been strange. I spent that whole next trip waiting for the long path through the woods that we had been on the first time, but they never appeared. Following the same directions as the first time, the entire trip took me about 3 hours, as did every other trip I made out there in the following years. I don't know what happened and I've never been able to replicate it. I still wonder what happened and where we really were when passing through those woods. My grandparents had a big farm when I was growing up, and all of the grandkids would help work it over the summer when we were out of school. Anytime we saw a rabbit, we were supposed to get it with the hoe or grab the shotgun. I was around 12 or so when I saw a little rabbit in the beans, and I didn't want my grandfather to see it, so I tried to chase it off. Followed it into the brush on the land, and for whatever reason, I just kept following it because usually I'd lose sight of them pretty quickly once they hit the brush. Kept following it until I found what was clearly an old barn ruin. These are pretty normal to happen upon where I'm from, and they're fun to look around inside, so I went in. It was weirdly kept up really well with antique tools in great shape and fresh hay. I worried I had crossed into our neighbor's property, so I hightailed it out of there. I asked my grandfather about it, and he said our land went way far past what I had described, and I couldn't have left our land in the short amount of time I was gone, so he followed me out there, and we couldn't find it. I checked every summer I worked there and never found it again. Not creepy, but it always drove me crazy where that stupid barn went. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19 or 20, and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before, had never even seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave, and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While in there, we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly. Hearing weird and strange things. Feeling like we were being touched, poked and pulled and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered, it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week. But have never been able to find this cave again. A group of friends and I decided to take a small Saturday afternoon road trip into the back country of South Carolina. We figured we'd just drive around, head southwest, and see if we could find some antique shops, cemeteries, abandoned buildings and the like. We pile into my car and start driving. It's about an hour of nothing, just some light conversation and southern pine forests. We pass a few horse farms, some quaint old mill towns, and a few gas stations, but nothing interesting yet. 2 p.m. rolls around and we decide we wanted to get something to eat. As a rule, we always like to try local diners and restaurants, so we kept driving until we saw a faded road sign for a town. It was about 5 miles down the road and we figured that's good enough. As we're driving through the town, we notice there's no one out. No cars on the roads, no people on the streets, and no real houses. The streets are lined with abandoned and boarded-up warehouses, shops with broken windows, and a few broken-down cars from the 90s. The further we go, the worse it gets. We finally get to a diner that's right off their main street. It looks like there's about 10 people eating inside and there's a few cars in the parking lot. Seems like they're open. Here's where it starts to get weird. We open the door and step in. As soon as we clear the threshold, everyone stares at us. It's like in movies where the record scratches on the jukebox and everyone looks, except far more uncomfortable. In the middle of the diner is a large table with 6 people around it, who all turn back to their food and start whisper talking. The waitress nervously shuffles up to us and quietly asks how many. My friend Chris takes the lead and says 4 in just a normal speaking voice. Everyone looks at us again and the waitress, who looks barely older than 16, recoils, but takes us to our table. She sat us in a basic 4 top near the large table in the middle. She takes our drink orders and leaves. Once she goes, we all whisper about how weird that was. While we're talking, the line cook is just staring at us with this violent look in his eyes. We all figure out what we want and wait. We sit in awkward silence for about 10 minutes before the waitress comes back. She takes our orders and disappears into the back of the diner, leaving us alone in the dining room with the people at the other table. It gives us some time to look them over. They're a basic southern family. Chubby, haggard-looking wife. Husband with sun-leathered skin and oil stains on his coveralls. 3 children, all girls, all in nice Sunday dresses. And then her. The other woman was dressed like the younger girls but looked very much in her 40s. She wore a red paisley patterned dress with frilled lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was long and stringy and covered the bulk of her round face. To the left of her was a doll, seated in a high chair for babies. The woman would sometimes lean in towards the doll and whisper something, then giggle. Soon, the waitress dropped food off at their table but set a meal down for the doll too. She commented on how pretty the woman's daughter was and left. About 10 minutes later, she came back with our food, silently left it, gave us the side-eye, and walked away. The waitress came back to refill the other table's water, where she asked everyone how the food was, but asked the doll too. When she asked the doll, she spoke in a baby voice. The woman then picked up the doll, held it in front of her face, and spoke in a little girl's voice. She was being the doll. My other friend looked at me with the most terrified, wide-eyed expression. She worked with disturbed children as a therapist in a court-mandated facility. We shoveled our mediocre food down, and my friend Chris just dumped $40 on the table and we left. As we were leaving the town, Chris was looking for any sort of town name. I was checking to make sure we weren't being followed. This happened about 6 years ago, and we still can't find that town. No one remembers the name or the road it was off of, but we remember being there and what the diner looked like. I was driving from Dallas to Tuscaloosa. Left at midnight and drove straight through the night with 2 friends passed out sleeping. It was probably 4 a.m., and I had a 1/4 tank of gas, which translates to about 100 miles. I see that the nearest town is about 90 miles, so I'm pretty worried about making it. Before I hit that town, I ran into a tiny town that wasn't on the map. A few houses, a gas station, a convenience store, and that was about it. I walk into the gas station and hand the guy a 50 so I can fill up. He was a really tall skinny black guy. Like skin wrapped around bones level skinny. Probably 6'5" at least. And he just had this eerie look about him. He looks at me, leans over the counter, scans the outside, and looks back at me. He hands me my $50 back and a hat and says, "Look, you look like a nice young fella. You don't want to be out here at this time of night looking like that. Put the hat on, get to your car quickly, and get gas at the next town." Based on the way he said it and how he pointed, looking like that was about being white I think, but I'm not positive. I was super confused and just said, "I don't have enough gas to get there, that's why I'm here. I didn't even know this place existed." He responds, "It doesn't. Here, there's 2 gallons left in this can. Just drive another 15 to 20 miles out and use those 2 gallons. But please, you need to move now." At that point, I stopped questioning him and left. On my return trip, it was daytime. So I wanted to stop back in and return the can with 2 gallons in it. But wouldn't you fleabing know? Couldn't find the goddarn little town again. It's like it disappeared over the weekend. To this day, I refuse to stop in small towns that aren't on the map. I have no idea what that gas station employee was trying to save me from, but he pushed me out of there with some urgency and even gave me free gas to do so. I was a vehicle mechanic in the Army Reserves when I was younger. On one overnight drill, we drove a convoy of trucks from Baltimore to Fort A.P. Hill, VI on the old state highways. Things started out pretty normally, but as we were driving, the convoy gradually starts slowing down, and after a while the whole line of trucks has slowed to a crawl. We pulled off the road and the guy in the lead truck tells us his 5-ton won't accelerate at all. We switch trucks and sure enough, it won't go above 5 miles per hour. I dropped the truck out of the convoy and my motor sergeant stayed with me in a pickup truck. About a half hour later, we happen to come across an old gas station and decide that we are not going anywhere fast, so we will park the truck there. I was to remain with the truck until they could come back later and transfer everything to another one. So off drives my motor sergeant, and I am out in the middle of southern Bumflurbo, Maryland with nobody around. It starts getting dark and I see the lights are on, and the restaurant is open at the gas station, and I am hungry as heck so in I go. I sit down in a booth by the window where I can keep an eye on the truck, and a lady comes and asks me what I want to eat. I ask if I can have a menu and she says she doesn't have one, but they have fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and that sounded pretty good to me, so I order it. I was starving hungry and it was the best darn fried chicken I have ever eaten. I finish, get the bill, leave my money on the table and walked back out to the truck. I stayed awake for a while, but eventually I laid down across the seat and slept a few hours. Now about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, another truck shows up with a bunch of guys and we start transferring gear to the other 5-ton. One of the guys says, "You must be starving," and I say, "No, I ate at the restaurant." Well, this guy gives me the strangest look and says, "You didn't eat at that restaurant. Look at it." Well, it's the middle of the night and I can't see the building that well, and I just told him he was crazy and we leave. I slept a couple hours and then we had to go back in the morning to deal with this broke down truck, and that's when I had a WTF moment. All the windows to this station are boarded up and the place looks like it had been abandoned for 20 years. At this point, I am seriously weirded out, so I go over and peek through the glass on the door, which it was uncovered. My fleeting money was still sitting on the table. I couldn't get away from that place fast enough. When my brother and I were 10 and 12 respectively, our family went on a hike through the cemetery and into the woods not far from our house. My brothers and I would explore these woods every day. Even camped in them before. We knew it like the back of our hands. Anyway, as the family hits our usual spot by the creek halfway through, brother 1 and I said we'd be back in a few. We wanted to wander off further up creek. So we did. We came across a very large hill we had never seen before. It was littered with what looked like someone's worldly possessions. As if they turned a house upside down, shook out the contents, took the house and left. There were tons of painted X on the trees, showing someone intended to cut them down at some point. We poked around for a few when we thought we heard our mom hollering at us. So we turned tail and walked maybe 20 feet back down the hill to where our parents were. The entire encounter was maybe 45 minutes long. On our end. As soon as our mom saw us, we got the beating of a lifetime. We had actually been gone almost 4 hours. She never saw us walk up any hill and remembered seeing us meandering down the straight path by the creek, not turning up a hill that was 20 feet away. She and her husband and our other brother combed the woods for over 4 hours screaming our names and couldn't find hide nor tail of us. We pleaded our case and even tried showing her the hill. Surely she was messing with us. So we stomped up to the turnoff for the hill and it was gone. Nowhere to be seen. For years we explored the woods determined to find that fleeting hill. We covered miles and miles of off-path woods. As we got older, we mapped it out. To this day, that hill does not exist. We never found it again. Never found the weird furniture, toys, clothes, and other household items that were scattered across the hill. And never met anyone in the area that had a clue about the hill. We probably just wandered way further than we meant to, but I always found it weird that we never found the hill again.